Samantha Shelley Nance was born and raised in the small town of Italy, Texas, where she quickly became known for her artistic talent and bright personality. Growing up in a close-knit community, Shelley displayed an early love for creativity, filling sketchbooks with drawings that reflected her keen eye for detail and deep imagination. Encouraged by her family, she pursued her artistic ambitions with determination, often participating in school art competitions and local exhibitions. Her parents, proud of her accomplishments, supported her dreams of making a name for herself in the art world. In high school, Shelley's talent blossomed further, earning her recognition among teachers and peers. Friends described her as warm, ambitious, and driven, with a contagious enthusiasm that inspired those around her. Beyond her artistic pursuits, Shelley enjoyed music, travel, and spending time with loved ones, always seeking inspiration from the world around her. After graduating, Shelley set her sights on higher education and was accepted into the Art Institute of Dallas, a prestigious step toward achieving her dreams. The transition from small-town life to the bustling city was both exciting and challenging, but she embraced the experience with optimism. Shelley quickly adapted to her new environment, immersing herself in her studies and forming close friendships with classmates who shared her passion for creativity. At the Institute, Shelley focused on honing her skills in digital design and visual arts. Professors recognized her dedication and talent, often praising her for her work ethic and originality. She became known for her unique artistic style, blending traditional techniques with modern digital elements. Outside the classroom, she explored Dallas's vibrant art scene, visiting galleries and drawing inspiration from the city's culture. Shelley shared an apartment with Ashley Olvera, a fellow student who became one of her closest friends. Their bond grew stronger as they navigated the challenges of college life together. Ashley often recalled Shelley's kindness, noting how she always offered encouragement and support, no matter how stressful their coursework became. Despite the demands of her studies, Shelley remained committed to maintaining a balanced life, enjoying social outings and maintaining regular contact with her family back home. In addition to her academic life, Shelley had a promising romantic relationship with Nathan Shuck, another student at the Institute. The two shared a mutual love for art and spent countless hours discussing their creative aspirations. Friends and classmates often saw them together at campus events, supporting each other's projects and envisioning a future where they could turn their passion into a career. However, not everything in Shelley's life was perfect. As she pursued her dreams, subtle tensions began to surface in her social circle, particularly surrounding her relationship with Nathan. Some classmates noticed an undercurrent of jealousy and possessiveness from an unexpected source: Nathan's roommate, Daniel William. Initially, Daniel appeared to be a quiet, reserved individual, but as time passed, his behavior toward Shelley became increasingly unsettling. Despite these minor concerns, Shelley remained focused on her future. Her ambition was unwavering, and she looked forward to completing her degree and establishing herself in the art industry. With a bright future ahead, Shelley had every reason to believe that she was on the path to success. But the promise of tomorrow would soon be shattered by an act of unimaginable violence, one that would forever change the lives of those who knew and loved her. On the morning of September 11th, 2009, Ashley Olvera, Shelley's roommate, returned to their Lake Highlands apartment in Dallas, Texas, after attending classes at the Art Institute. She had not seen Shelley for a few days and was growing concerned, especially since Shelley's parents had also mentioned they hadn't heard from her recently. Upon entering the apartment, Ashley noticed an unsettling silence. Calling out for Shelley yielded no response. Apprehensively, she approached Shelley's bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. Pushing it open, Ashley was met with a horrifying sight. Shelley lay face down on her bed, the sheets stained with blood. Overcome with shock and fear, Ashley immediately dialed 911, her hands trembling as she relayed the grim discovery. First responders arrived swiftly, securing the scene and confirming the worst. 20-year-old Samantha Shelley Nance was deceased. detectives from the Dallas Police Department were called in to investigate. The initial assessment revealed that Shelley had been brutally attacked. She had suffered 42 stab wounds to her neck and back, indicating a violent and personal assault. There were no signs of forced entry into the apartment, suggesting that Shelley either knew her attacker or had willingly allowed them inside. Additionally, there was no evidence of sexual assault or robbery, leading investigators to believe that the motive was deeply personal. As news of Shelley's tragic death spread, the community was left in shock. Friends, family, and classmates were devastated by the loss of a young woman who had shown so much promise and talent. Vigils were held in her honor, with many expressing their grief and sharing fond memories of Shelley. The senselessness of the crime left everyone searching for answers, while the authorities worked tirelessly to piece together the events leading up to that fateful day. Investigators began by interviewing those closest to Shelley, hoping to uncover any information that could lead them to the perpetrator. They spoke with Ashley, who recounted her last interactions with Shelley and provided details about their living arrangements. Shelley's boyfriend, Nathan Shuck, was also questioned extensively. As the investigation progressed, detectives would uncover a web of jealousy and obsession that would ultimately lead them to Shelley's killer. When detectives arrived at Shelley's apartment, they were met with a scene that spoke volumes about the brutal nature of the attack. Shelley's bedroom, once a sanctuary of creativity and self-expression, was now a place of unimaginable horror. Her body was found lying face down on her bed, covered in blood, with multiple stab wounds to her back and neck. The violent nature of the injuries suggested a frenzied and personal attack, leading investigators to believe that the perpetrator knew Shelley well. One of the most alarming details was the sheer number of wounds, 42 in total. The medical examiner would later confirm that the injuries had been inflicted with a knife, with the majority targeting her upper body. There were no signs of a struggle elsewhere in the apartment, implying that Shelley may have been caught off guard or incapacitated quickly. Despite the intensity of the attack, the crime scene itself was eerily orderly. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken locks or windows, and no clear indication of a struggle beyond Shelley's bedroom. Investigators meticulously combed through the apartment, searching for clues that could lead them to the perpetrator. They found no evidence of theft. Shelley's valuables, including her wallet, laptop, and jewelry, were untouched. This suggested that the motive was not robbery but something far more personal. Police collected DNA samples from the scene, carefully swabbing areas where they believed the attacker may have left traces of evidence. One crucial piece of evidence was a single small bloody footprint near the doorway of Shelley's bedroom. Investigators determined it did not match Shelley's shoe size, suggesting it belonged to the killer. Another disturbing find was a torn plastic Ziploc bag found in a nearby trash can, which appeared to have traces of Shelley's blood and hair inside. This discovery raised chilling questions. Had the killer taken something from the scene? And if so, why? With no signs of forced entry, detectives turned their attention to the possibility that Shelley had willingly let her attacker in. They began to examine her relationships, focusing on close friends, acquaintances, and romantic connections. Shelley's boyfriend, Nathan Shuck, became an immediate person of interest. Nathan had spent significant time at the apartment, and investigators wondered if their relationship had taken a dark turn. As forensic specialists continued their analysis, investigators conducted interviews with Shelley's neighbors and friends. They learned that Shelley had last been seen alive the evening before, and no one had reported any disturbances. However, one neighbor recalled seeing an unfamiliar figure lingering near the apartment complex on the night of the murder. The description was vague, an average-built man in dark clothing, but it gave detectives their first potential lead. Back at the police station, Shelley's roommate, Ashley Olvera, provided a timeline of events leading up to the discovery of the body. She had been out of town for a few days and, upon returning, immediately sensed something was wrong. The apartment had an unusual stillness, and the fact that Shelley had not returned any calls or messages alarmed her. Ashley described Shelley's relationship with Nathan as mostly positive, but mentioned an unsettling tension surrounding his roommate, Daniel William. Daniel, a quiet and introverted figure, had been living with Nathan and had shown an unusual interest in Shelley. Friends noted that he often watched her from a distance and seemed envious of Nathan's relationship with her. Ashley revealed that Shelley had mentioned feeling uncomfortable around Daniel on several occasions, but had brushed it off, not wanting to create unnecessary conflict between him and Nathan. With these revelations, detectives began to shift their focus. Could Daniel's silent presence have masked a darker obsession? Did his feelings for Shelley take a deadly turn? As forensic results started coming in, authorities would soon find answers that would shock even the most seasoned investigators. As detectives delved deeper into Shelley's life, they turned their attention to those closest to her, starting with her boyfriend, Nathan Schuck. Nathan, visibly shaken by the news of Shelley's murder, cooperated fully with authorities. He provided a detailed account of his whereabouts on the night of the crime, stating that he had been out with friends and had later returned to the apartment he shared with his roommate, Daniel William. Despite Nathan's apparent grief and willingness to assist in the investigation, police knew they had to follow standard procedure. They combed through his phone records, social media interactions, and text messages with Shelley, searching for any signs of conflict or distress. Nathan admitted that he and Shelley had their share of disagreements, as any couple did, but maintained that their relationship was loving and supportive. Still, detectives couldn't ignore the unsettling find made during a search of his apartment: a Ziploc bag containing strands of Shelley's hair and traces of her blood. The discovery of the bag raised immediate red flags. Nathan insisted he had no idea how it had ended up in his apartment and suggested that someone might have planted it. Investigators knew they had to tread carefully. They questioned Nathan about his roommate, Daniel William, and his response was telling. Nathan hesitated before describing Daniel as a bit odd and reclusive, admitting that he had recently noticed tension in their friendship. As detectives dug into Daniel's background, they uncovered a troubling pattern. Described by those who knew him as introverted and socially awkward, Daniel had struggled to form meaningful relationships. Former classmates at the Art Institute described him as a loner who harbored an intense admiration for Nathan. Some even hinted that his feelings bordered on obsession, fueling suspicions that Daniel had resented Shelley's presence in Nathan's life. Witnesses recounted instances where Daniel seemed jealous of Shelley's relationship with Nathan, often making passive-aggressive remarks when she was around. A friend of Nathan's told police that Daniel once confided in him, saying, "Shelley doesn't deserve him. She's ruining everything." These comments, coupled with Daniel's odd behavior and proximity to the crime scene, placed him squarely in the investigators' crosshairs. Detectives also analyzed security footage from the apartment complex, hoping to piece together a timeline. While no cameras directly captured Shelley's apartment door, footage from a nearby entrance showed Daniel entering the complex alone, late on the evening of September 10th. His demeanor appeared tense, and he was seen carrying a small bag. Surveillance later captured him leaving in the early hours of the morning, now without the bag in hand. This timeline coincided suspiciously with the estimated time of Shelley's murder. As the investigation progressed, detectives obtained a search warrant for Daniel's belongings. Inside his room, they found several disturbing items: printed photographs of Shelley, some taken without her knowledge, and a journal containing ominous, obsessive entries about her. Phrases like, "She's always in the way," and "Nathan will see the truth soon," painted a picture of a man consumed by jealousy and resentment. When confronted with the evidence, Daniel denied any involvement in Shelley's murder, claiming the photos were harmless and insisting he had been at home all night. However, his alibi quickly fell apart when police discovered receipts from a nearby Walmart dated the night of the crime. Surveillance footage from the store showed him purchasing gloves and cleaning supplies, items consistent with an attempt to cover up a violent act. With mounting evidence against him, detectives felt they were closing in on Shelley's killer. The once quiet, socially awkward roommate now appeared to be harboring dark secrets, and the investigation was about to take a chilling turn. Daniel's fascination with Nathan bordered on the obsessive. Friends reported that he often seemed overly protective of their friendship and grew increasingly uncomfortable whenever Shelley was around. Several of Nathan's classmates mentioned that Daniel would often make passive-aggressive remarks about Shelley, dismissing her as a distraction and claiming that she was holding Nathan back from his potential. Investigators began to suspect that this resentment had festered into something much darker. Digging deeper, police interviewed those who had spent time with Daniel in social settings. Former classmates described moments when Daniel appeared irritated whenever Nathan spoke about Shelley or made plans with her. One acquaintance recalled Daniel once saying, "If she weren't around, things would be so much better." At the time, it seemed like an offhand comment. Now, in the wake of Shelley's murder, it carried a far more sinister weight. A breakthrough came when investigators obtained a search warrant for Daniel's personal belongings. In his bedroom, they discovered a chilling collection of Shelley's photographs, many taken without her knowledge. Some were from social events, while others appeared to have been taken from a distance, suggesting he had been watching her without her realizing it. Even more disturbing was a handwritten journal found beneath his mattress. Inside the journal, detectives found disturbing entries detailing Daniel's growing resentment toward Shelley. One entry read, "She's always there, always in the way. Nathan would see the truth if she were gone." Another ominous passage declared, "I know what I have to do now. He'll thank me one day." The writings painted a picture of a man consumed by jealousy and an obsessive need to remove Shelley from Nathan's life. Further scrutiny of Daniel's activities on the night of the murder provided damning evidence. Surveillance footage from a nearby Walmart captured Daniel making suspicious purchases just hours before Shelley's estimated time of death. He was seen buying a set of gloves, cleaning supplies, and a box of large Ziploc bags, the same type of bag found in Nathan's apartment containing traces of Shelley's blood and hair. The timestamp on the receipt placed him in the store around 9:45 p.m. on September 10, 2009. Police theorized that after purchasing the supplies, Daniel waited for an opportunity to strike. With Ashley out of town and Nathan unaware, Daniel likely used his knowledge of Shelley's schedule to enter the apartment undetected. Investigators believed that Shelley had either let him in willingly, not suspecting any threat, or that he had access to a spare key Nathan kept in their apartment. A crucial piece of forensic evidence soon emerged. Traces of Shelley's blood were found on the soles of a pair of sneakers recovered from Daniel's closet. Though he had attempted to clean them, luminol testing revealed the presence of blood, further linking him to the crime. When confronted with this evidence, Daniel maintained his innocence, claiming he had nothing to do with Shelley's death and that the shoes had been stained from an unrelated incident. Despite his denials, detectives felt they had enough to charge Daniel with Shelley's murder. The case against him was building rapidly, with a clear motive of jealousy and obsession driving his actions. What had initially appeared to be a tragic, senseless killing was now revealing itself as a premeditated act, fueled by Daniel's deep-seated resentment and his unreciprocated feelings toward Nathan. As authorities prepared to make an arrest, they knew the trial ahead would be difficult, especially with Daniel's continued insistence of his innocence. But the evidence, both physical and circumstantial, painted a damning picture, one that Shelley's friends and family hoped would finally bring justice for the promising young artist, whose life was cut short by an all-consuming obsession. As investigators built their case against Daniel William, forensic evidence and witness testimonies painted a chilling picture. DNA tests confirmed traces of Shelley's blood on Daniel's shoes and car interior, while surveillance footage showed him buying gloves and cleaning supplies the night before the murder. His disturbing journal entries, detailing his resentment toward Shelley and obsession with Nathan, further solidified suspicions. Phone records placed Daniel near Shelley's apartment at the estimated time of death, contradicting his alibi. Interviews with classmates revealed his growing jealousy, with one friend recalling him saying, "She's ruining everything." With mounting evidence, police arrested Daniel on November 15, 2009, charging him with first-degree murder. Daniel's trial began in late 2010, drawing significant public interest. Prosecutors presented a strong case, arguing that his obsession with Nathan and hatred toward Shelley drove him to murder. They highlighted his journal, suspicious purchases, and forensic evidence linking him to the crime scene. Nathan testified, sharing how Daniel's behavior had grown increasingly possessive and hostile toward Shelley. The defense, however, argued the case was circumstantial, claiming Daniel's odd behavior did not equate to guilt. Shelley's mother gave an emotional testimony, sharing the devastating impact of the loss on their family. After weeks of deliberation, the jury found Daniel guilty of first-degree murder. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without parole, with the judge citing the brutal and premeditated nature of the crime. Shelley's family expressed relief, but struggled with the immense loss. Her friends and classmates honored her memory through art exhibits and tributes, ensuring her legacy endured despite the tragedy. To honor Shelley's passion, the Art Institute of Dallas established the Shelley Nance Memorial Scholarship, helping aspiring artists pursue their dreams. Her hometown of Italy, Texas, held annual art events in her name, while her parents became advocates for violence prevention. Through these efforts, Shelley's memory lived on, inspiring countless others. Melinda Snyder was a bright, ambitious young woman whose life was tragically cut short in 1990, leaving a void in the hearts of her family, friends, and the community of Rock Hill, South Carolina. Born and raised in this quiet town, Melinda was known for her radiant smile, kind nature, and determination to make a difference in the world. As a former beauty queen, she had a captivating presence that extended beyond the stage, earning admiration from peers and teachers alike. A recent graduate of Winthrop University, Melinda had her sights set on a promising future. She pursued a degree in business administration with dreams of building a successful career in real estate. Her interest in the field was inspired by her mother, a respected real estate agent in Rock Hill, who often spoke about the challenges and rewards of the profession. Melinda's determination to follow in her mother's footsteps was evident in her diligent studies and internships, where she displayed remarkable professionalism and enthusiasm. Beyond academics and career aspirations, Melinda was an active participant in community service and church activities. She frequently volunteered at local shelters and fundraising events, demonstrating a strong sense of compassion and responsibility. Friends described her as someone who could light up a room with her infectious energy and unwavering optimism. In the months leading up to her death, Melinda had been enjoying her newfound independence after moving into a condominium on Eden Terrace. It was a fresh start filled with exciting prospects, but it also came with its own set of challenges. Despite the adjustments of living alone, she maintained close contact with her family, particularly her mother and younger brother, who often checked in on her well-being. However, Melinda's life took a devastating turn on January 23, 1990. What began as an ordinary day ended in an unimaginable tragedy, shocking the entire community. The circumstances surrounding her death would soon unravel a complex investigation filled with twists, legal battles, and a relentless pursuit of justice. On the night of January 23, 1990, Rock Hill's usual calm was shattered by a chilling emergency call that would set in motion one of the most unsettling murder investigations in the town's history. The call came from Melinda Snyder's condominium on Eden Terrace, a place that, until then, had been a sanctuary for the young woman as she embarked on her post-college life. The call, placed around 10:30 p.m., was brief but alarming. A concerned neighbor, having heard loud thuds and a muffled scream from Melinda's unit, dialed 911. Responding officers from the Rock Hill Police Department arrived within minutes, finding no immediate signs of forced entry. However, upon entering the apartment, they stumbled upon a horrifying scene. Melinda's lifeless body lay sprawled on the bedroom floor, partially clothed and showing signs of a violent struggle. A deep wound to the head indicated blunt force trauma, and bruising around her neck suggested strangulation. Investigators believed the attack had been sudden and brutal, catching her off guard in what should have been the safety of her home. A nearby lamp had been knocked over, and several personal belongings were scattered across the room, hinting at a desperate attempt to defend herself. Crime scene technicians meticulously combed through the apartment, noting the absence of any signs of forced entry. This detail raised immediate concerns. Had Melinda known her attacker? Or had someone gained access to the unit through other means? The front door was locked when officers arrived, leading detectives to consider the possibility that the assailant had used a spare key or entered through an unlocked door or window. As investigators pieced together the final hours of Melinda's life, they discovered that she had last been seen earlier that evening at a local grocery store, where she had stopped to pick up a few items after work. Surveillance footage from the store captured her chatting briefly with a cashier before heading home. Friends reported that Melinda had spoken to her mother over the phone around 7 p.m., mentioning that she planned to relax for the evening and prepare for a busy day at work the following morning. In her condominium, nothing appeared to be stolen. Her purse, wallet, and keys remained untouched, ruling out robbery as a primary motive. However, investigators found something unsettling: a realtor's lockbox attached to the doorknob. Melinda's mother, who had helped her find the apartment, recalled that the lockbox had been left behind by the previous tenants and was still there despite efforts to have it removed. The presence of this device raised questions about whether someone could have accessed a spare key without her knowledge. The news of Melinda's murder spread rapidly through Rock Hill, sending shockwaves through the community. Friends, co-workers, and neighbors were devastated, struggling to comprehend how such a tragedy could befall someone so beloved. Candlelight vigils were held in her honor, and local law enforcement vowed to leave no stone unturned in their pursuit of justice. Despite the grim scene, investigators remained hopeful that forensic evidence would provide crucial leads. Fibers, fingerprints, and traces of DNA were collected, with hopes that technological advancements could reveal the identity of the perpetrator. However, the lack of immediate suspects left detectives with more questions than answers. Who had the opportunity and motive to harm Melinda? And how had they managed to escape without leaving a clear trail? As detectives pressed forward with their investigation, they turned their attention to Melinda's personal life, examining relationships, acquaintances, and anyone who might have had a reason to do her harm. In the days following Melinda Snyder's tragic murder, the Rock Hill Police Department launched an intensive investigation, meticulously examining every aspect of her life. Investigators faced mounting pressure from both the public and media, who were eager for answers in a case that had gripped the small community with fear and speculation. Detectives began by focusing on those closest to Melinda, believing the perpetrator was likely someone she knew. The first person they interviewed was her roommate, who had been away at the time of the murder. She provided valuable insight into Melinda's recent activities and relationships, describing her as a cautious person who rarely opened the door to strangers. Despite this, she revealed that Melinda had been feeling uneasy in the weeks leading up to her death, mentioning a lingering sense of being watched. Attention soon shifted to Melinda's ex-boyfriend, a local mechanic named Brian Carver. Their relationship had ended several months prior, but friends suggested that Brian had struggled to move on. Witnesses recalled seeing him outside Melinda's condominium on more than one occasion after their breakup, fueling suspicions that he may have harbored resentment. When questioned, Brian admitted to having lingering feelings for Melinda, but denied any involvement in her death. He provided an alibi, stating he had been working late at his auto shop on the night of the murder. Investigators verified his claims, temporarily ruling him out as a suspect. Another person of interest was Melinda's brother, Jason Snyder. The two had been close growing up, but their relationship had reportedly grown strained in recent months due to personal disagreements. Detectives questioned him extensively about his whereabouts on the night of January 23rd. Jason maintained that he had been at home with his girlfriend and expressed deep sorrow over his sister's death. Although his alibi held up, some investigators remained wary of unresolved tensions between the siblings. Despite extensive interviews, one lingering mystery continued to baffle detectives: the realtor lockbox found on Melinda's front door. Friends and family insisted that Melinda rarely used it, raising the chilling possibility that someone else had gained access to her apartment through it. Investigators traced the lockbox back to a local real estate agency, discovering that it had been used during the property's previous sale. Further digging revealed that one realtor in particular, Edward Ed Cronell, had shown the apartment multiple times and retained access to the lockbox key even after the sale was finalized. Cronell was a well-known figure in Rock Hill's real estate market, described by colleagues as charismatic but occasionally aggressive when closing deals. When detectives reached out to him for an interview, they noted his evasive demeanor and inconsistent statements about his interactions with Melinda. He initially claimed to have no recollection of her, but phone records later revealed several calls made to her apartment in the weeks leading up to her death. Cronell attempted to explain them away as routine follow-ups related to the lockbox's removal, but his explanations did little to alleviate detectives' growing suspicions. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the crime scene continued. Hair samples and fingerprints found in Melinda's bedroom were compared against known acquaintances, but no definitive match emerged. Investigators worked tirelessly to build a timeline of events, piecing together her last known movements and potential encounters. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses showed no signs of forced entry, further complicating the case. As the investigation deepened, detectives began to suspect that Melinda's killer had planned the attack carefully, exploiting their knowledge of her routines and vulnerabilities. The possibility that she had been targeted due to her real estate connections became a growing concern, leading law enforcement to expand their inquiry into individuals with ties to the industry. Despite mounting leads and an expanding list of persons of interest, the investigation remained frustratingly inconclusive. As days turned into weeks, the Rock Hill community anxiously awaited justice for Melinda Snyder, unaware that the most shocking revelations were yet to come. Melinda's mother, Diane Snyder, recalled the lockbox being present when they first toured the condominium months earlier. The property had previously been listed with a local real estate agency, which used the lockbox to allow agents and prospective buyers access to the unit. Although Melinda had moved in months ago, the device had never been removed, something that, in hindsight, now seemed like a critical oversight. Investigators traced the lockbox to Carolina Realty Group, a prominent real estate firm in Rock Hill. Records indicated that multiple agents had access to the lockbox code during the sale of the property. Among those listed was Edward Ed Cronell, a realtor with a reputation for being persistent and sometimes intrusive in his dealings with clients. He had shown the condominium several times before Melinda's purchase, and according to records, had visited the property as recently as 2 weeks before her death, under the pretense of checking on the unit's condition. Further examination of the lockbox usage logs revealed disturbing inconsistencies. The device had been accessed on the night of Melinda's murder, but the entry was not logged under her name or any authorized personnel. This suggested that someone with prior knowledge of the code had used it to enter the apartment undetected. Investigators questioned whether Cronell or someone else with access could have exploited this security loophole. As suspicion mounted, detectives questioned Cronell again. His responses grew increasingly defensive, and when pressed about his whereabouts on January 23rd, he offered conflicting statements. Initially, he claimed to have been at home watching television, but further investigation revealed that his vehicle had been spotted near Eden Terrace around the time of the crime. Surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store captured a man resembling Cronell purchasing a soft drink just minutes from Melinda's apartment, contradicting his earlier alibi. In addition to the lockbox, investigators found a troubling connection between Cronell and Melinda. Friends disclosed that Melinda had mentioned feeling uneasy around him after he made unsolicited visits to her apartment under the guise of discussing unresolved paperwork. She had once confided to a coworker that Cronell gave her an uncomfortable vibe, but had brushed off her concerns, assuming they were harmless. Despite mounting circumstantial evidence, prosecutors knew that proving Cronell's involvement would require more than speculation. The forensic team was tasked with analyzing the lockbox for fingerprints and DNA evidence, hoping it would place Cronell or another suspect directly at the scene. Meanwhile, detectives continued to probe his background, uncovering a history of inappropriate behavior toward female clients that had previously gone unreported. As detectives delved deeper into the circumstances surrounding Melinda Snyder's murder, one name repeatedly surfaced: Edward "Ed" Cronell. What initially appeared to be a routine connection between a real estate agent and a former client soon escalated into a major focal point of the investigation. Cronell's interactions with Melinda, combined with discrepancies in his alibi and his access to the realtor lockbox, placed him under growing scrutiny. Detectives continued to probe Cronell's past and discovered a troubling pattern. In the years prior, several women had filed informal complaints against him, alleging inappropriate behavior during property viewings. Though no formal charges were ever filed, these incidents painted a picture of a man who may have used his position to gain access to women's homes under the guise of business. With mounting suspicion, investigators obtained a warrant to search Cronell's home and vehicle. Inside his car, they found a set of keys that included one striking discovery: a duplicate key to Melinda's condominium. Cronell insisted that the key was from a prior showing, claiming he had simply forgotten to return it. However, forensic testing revealed traces of Melinda's DNA on the key, suggesting it had been handled recently. As evidence against Cronell continued to build, detectives faced the challenge of securing a direct link between him and the crime scene. The forensic team carefully analyzed fibers and fingerprints collected from Melinda's bedroom, hoping for a match. Meanwhile, prosecutors prepared to request a court order to obtain Cronell's DNA, a move that would set off a contentious legal battle in the months to come. Cronell's demeanor shifted dramatically under pressure. Initially cooperative, he grew increasingly agitated during interrogations, often deflecting questions or claiming he was being unfairly targeted. His colleagues, once willing to vouch for him, began to distance themselves, uneasy about the cloud of suspicion that now surrounded him. With growing confidence that Cronell was involved, detectives prepared to present their findings to the district attorney. However, they knew that circumstantial evidence alone might not be enough to secure a conviction. They needed irrefutable proof, something that would definitively place Cronell at the scene of the crime and bring justice for Melinda Snyder. While circumstantial evidence was strong, they needed his DNA to link him definitively to the crime. However, Cronell refused to provide a sample voluntarily, forcing prosecutors to seek a court order, a move his defense team fought aggressively, citing insufficient probable cause. The legal battle escalated to the South Carolina Supreme Court, with the defense arguing that Cronell's interactions with Melinda were purely professional. Meanwhile, prosecutors highlighted the disturbing pattern of his behavior and the lockbox access records. After weeks of debate, the court ruled in favor of law enforcement, allowing them to obtain a DNA sample via a cheek swab. Forensic analysts quickly compared Cronell's DNA to evidence from the crime scene, focusing on skin cells found under Melinda's fingernails. The match was conclusive, placing him at the scene. With this breakthrough, investigators prepared for trial, confident they had the evidence needed to bring justice for Melinda Snyder. The trial began in early 1992 at the York County Courthouse, with prosecutors presenting a compelling case built on circumstantial and forensic evidence. The courtroom was filled with emotion as Melinda's family and friends watched the proceedings unfold. Prosecutors emphasized the chilling nature of Cronell's actions, portraying him as a man who had carefully planned the crime and exploited his knowledge of real estate procedures to avoid suspicion. They argued that his persistent visits to Melinda's home and unauthorized access to the lockbox demonstrated a dangerous obsession. Witnesses, including Melinda's co-workers and family members, recounted her growing fear in the weeks leading up to her murder. They testified that she had expressed unease about Cronell's behavior, but never imagined it could lead to such a horrific outcome. Prosecutors presented surveillance footage, phone records, and forensic findings, including Melinda's DNA found under her fingernails, which proved a violent struggle had taken place. Cronell's defense team maintained his innocence, claiming that the forensic evidence could have resulted from his prior visits to the property. They argued that the prosecution had no eyewitnesses and that the case relied too heavily on circumstantial evidence. Despite their efforts, expert witnesses systematically refuted these claims, pointing out the specificity of the DNA evidence and the inconsistencies in Cronell's alibi. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Cronell guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Stephen Harland handed down a life sentence without parole, citing the premeditated and violent nature of the crime. Melinda's family, though relieved by the verdict, remained heartbroken over their loss. They vowed to honor her memory by pushing for stricter security measures in rental properties, ensuring that similar crimes could be prevented in the future. Alyssa Burkett was a young woman full of promise. Born in Texas, Alyssa grew up in a tight-knit family where she was known for her vibrant personality and deep love for those closest to her. She was hardworking, determined, and dedicated to carving out a better future for herself and her daughter. Alyssa's life revolved around her daughter, Willow Ann, whom she described as her greatest joy and purpose. Friends and family recall Alyssa's unwavering resolve to provide a safe and loving home for Willow, despite the challenges life threw her way. Alyssa met Andrew Beard in her early 20s. At first, their relationship appeared typical, marked by moments of happiness and the shared excitement of becoming parents. However, as time passed, cracks began to form. Andrew's behavior became increasingly controlling, and their relationship dissolved shortly after Willow's birth. While Alyssa embraced her new role as a single mother with determination, the separation triggered an ongoing legal battle over custody, which would eventually turn her life into a nightmare. Despite her personal struggles, Alyssa worked hard to maintain stability. She took a job managing a title company, which gave her the flexibility to care for her daughter while pursuing a career. Her colleagues admired her drive and positive outlook, and she developed a reputation as someone who persevered, even in the face of adversity. Her relationship with Andrew, however, remained strained. The custody dispute over Willow was fraught with tension, with both parties clashing over their roles as parents. Alyssa's friends noted that she often felt intimidated by Andrew, whose actions hinted at a darker, more manipulative side. Still, Alyssa focused on creating a happy home for Willow, determined to shield her daughter from the emotional toll of the custody battle. Unbeknownst to Alyssa, her commitment to raising Willow and moving on with her life would eventually put her in grave danger. As the custody dispute escalated, so did Andrew's resentment, setting the stage for a series of events that would end in tragedy. The custody battle over Willow Ann began shortly after Alyssa Burkett and Andrew Beard ended their relationship. While many separations lead to disputes over parenting time, the conflict between Alyssa and Andrew quickly escalated into an emotionally charged legal struggle. Alyssa sought primary custody, citing her role as Willow's primary caregiver. Andrew, on the other hand, pushed for greater control, claiming that shared custody would allow him to remain actively involved in his daughter's life. The court proceedings were far from amicable. Alyssa described Andrew as unpredictable and manipulative, often accusing him of using intimidation tactics to gain the upper hand. She told friends that Andrew's focus seemed less about Willow's well-being and more about control, both over her life and her parenting decisions. This custody battle consumed much of Alyssa's time and energy, forcing her to balance the demands of work, motherhood, and court appearances. Alyssa's concerns extended beyond the courtroom. She confided in friends and family that she felt unsafe due to Andrew's behavior. At times, she claimed he would make veiled threats or attempt to provoke her during exchanges of custody. These interactions left her feeling on edge as she struggled to maintain composure for the sake of her daughter. Despite these challenges, Alyssa remained determined to protect Willow. In court documents, she presented evidence of her ability to provide a stable and nurturing environment. She highlighted her consistent employment, close relationship with her daughter, and active role in Willow's development. Meanwhile, Andrew countered by portraying Alyssa as overly controlling and uncooperative, a claim she firmly denied. Adding to the tension was the fact that Andrew had recently become engaged to Holly Ann Elkins, a woman eager to play a significant role in Willow's life. Alyssa viewed Holly's involvement as intrusive, particularly when it became clear that Holly had opinions about the custody arrangement. Friends of Alyssa noted that she felt cornered, battling not just Andrew, but also his new partner, whose presence only amplified the pressure. Andrew Beard, once described as soft-spoken and reserved, presented an outward image of a committed father determined to maintain his role in his daughter Willow's life. However, beneath this facade, there were signs of his darker nature, an individual deeply troubled by control and resentment. As his custody battle with Alyssa Burkett dragged on, Andrew's frustration grew. He reportedly saw Alyssa's resistance as an affront to his authority and became consumed with anger over what he believed was her deliberate attempt to cut him out of their daughter's life. In the midst of the custody fight, Andrew met Holly Ann Elkins. Holly was a single mother herself, and the two quickly bonded over their shared experiences as parents. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and Holly became a prominent figure in Andrew's life. She soon made it clear that she wanted to help him gain custody of Willow. In fact, Holly's devotion to Andrew extended beyond the typical role of a supportive partner. She appeared to see herself as a potential maternal figure for Willow, further inflaming the already contentious custody dispute. Holly's presence in Andrew's life was not without controversy. Friends and family noted that she often inserted herself into the custody proceedings, offering unsolicited advice and even accompanying Andrew to court. Holly's involvement intensified Alyssa's distrust of Andrew, as she worried about Holly's motivations and the influence she might exert over her ex-partner. Alyssa confided in her close circle that Holly seemed overly eager to take on a motherly role, even though Alyssa was fully present in her daughter's life. Behind closed doors, Andrew and Holly discussed strategies to gain custody of Willow. According to later testimony and evidence, their conversations often centered on Alyssa, whom they both viewed as an obstacle. Holly allegedly encouraged Andrew to fight harder, going so far as to suggest that Alyssa was unfit to care for Willow. Together, they began to concoct plans that went far beyond legal avenues, delving into manipulation and outright deceit. Andrew's growing reliance on Holly's support blurred the lines between his custody fight and a calculated campaign against Alyssa. As their partnership strengthened, so did their shared resentment of the woman who stood between them and the life they envisioned. The couple's fixation on Alyssa signaled the beginning of a chain of events that would lead to an unimaginable crime. It began subtly, with Alyssa noticing unusual behavior from Andrew. At first, it was minor disruptions, delayed custody exchanges, cryptic comments meant to unsettle her, and arguments over trivial matters. However, the tactics soon became far more invasive. Alyssa began to suspect that someone was watching her every move. Her suspicions were confirmed when a GPS tracker was discovered hidden on her vehicle. She believed Andrew had planted it, a claim that would later be supported by evidence during the investigation. The tracker was only the beginning. Alyssa's co-workers at the title company she managed began noticing signs of her distress. She shared stories of feeling followed and receiving anonymous, harassing messages. While she couldn't prove Andrew's direct involvement at the time, Alyssa believed he was orchestrating these efforts to make her feel unsafe and vulnerable. Her fears grew as it became apparent that this wasn't a random act of harassment. It was a deliberate strategy to push her to the brink. Alyssa's car became a frequent target. On one occasion, she discovered drugs and a firearm placed inside her vehicle, items she insisted did not belong to her. She immediately contacted the police to report the incident, fearing that someone was trying to set her up for a crime she didn't commit. Her suspicions were validated when investigators uncovered communications that pointed to Andrew and his fiancée, Holly Elkins, as the perpetrators of the scheme. It appeared that the pair had staged this setup in an attempt to paint Alyssa as unfit and untrustworthy, hoping it would bolster Andrew's case for custody. False police reports also became a weapon in this campaign. Alyssa found herself the subject of multiple complaints filed against her, alleging reckless behavior and substance abuse, claims that were entirely fabricated. These accusations placed her under tremendous stress as she fought to prove her innocence while maintaining her focus on raising Willow. Each false report was another attempt to tarnish her reputation and undermine her standing in court. This ongoing harassment left Alyssa feeling isolated and terrified. She shared her experiences with close friends, who urged her to stay vigilant. Despite their support, Alyssa struggled to find a sense of security, knowing that Andrew and Holly's efforts to destabilize her life showed no signs of stopping. She installed security cameras at her home and became increasingly cautious in her daily routines, but the sense of being targeted never left her. The plot began to take shape in the weeks leading up to October 2020. Evidence later revealed that Andrew had started purchasing items that would play a key role in the crime. Surveillance footage and store receipts documented his acquisition of a fake beard, dark clothing, gloves, and other materials to be used as a disguise. Investigators would later uncover chilling internet searches on his devices, including topics related to evading detection and carrying out violent attacks. Holly, too, was deeply involved in the planning. Communications between her and Andrew indicated that she actively encouraged him to follow through with his intentions, offering suggestions and reinforcing his belief that Alyssa was an obstacle standing in the way of their happiness. Text messages and phone records painted a picture of a couple united by a singular, horrific goal: to ensure Alyssa could no longer interfere with their lives or their plans for Willow. Andrew's preparations also extended to securing the weapon he would use in the attack. He obtained a handgun, which he intended to use as part of the meticulously crafted ambush. To ensure Alyssa could not survive the encounter, Andrew planned to use additional methods to ensure her death, leaving no room for error. In the days leading up to October 2nd, 2020, Andrew conducted surveillance on Alyssa, observing her routines and identifying potential opportunities to strike. He focused on her workplace, a location he knew would be difficult for her to avoid. Alyssa, unaware of the danger that loomed, continued her daily life, doing her best to navigate the harassment, while staying focused on her responsibilities as a mother and professional. On the morning of October 2nd, Andrew put his plan into action. Disguised and armed, he made his way to Alyssa's workplace. His attire was carefully chosen to obscure his identity, with the fake beard and gloves ensuring that he would leave behind as little evidence as possible. Witnesses later described a masked figure lurking near the scene, their behavior strange but not immediately alarming. Andrew's attack was swift and brutal. As Alyssa arrived at work, he ambushed her in the parking lot, shooting her in the head. When it became clear that she had not died from the gunshot, Andrew resorted to a knife, stabbing her repeatedly. The sheer violence of the attack underscored his determination to ensure Alyssa could not survive. Witnesses and co-workers, alerted by the commotion, rushed to the scene, but were too late to intervene. Andrew fled, leaving behind a trail of devastation and a community in shock. In the immediate aftermath, investigators worked to piece together what had happened. Surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and witness statements would eventually lead them to Andrew and Holly, uncovering the intricate plot they had devised to rid themselves of Alyssa. The murder, though shocking in its brutality, was the culmination of months of planning and a reflection of the lengths to which Andrew and Holly were willing to go to achieve their goals. The murder of Alyssa Burkett set in motion a comprehensive investigation led by law enforcement in Carrollton, Texas. Detectives immediately recognized the complexity of the case, as the crime appeared premeditated and methodically executed. The brazen nature of the attack, coupled with the public location and visible evidence, gave investigators a strong starting point. They were determined to uncover the truth and bring Alyssa's killer to justice. Surveillance footage from the parking lot provided the first significant lead. The grainy video captured a disguised figure approaching Alyssa, though their identity was initially obscured by a fake beard and dark clothing. The vehicle used by the assailant was also identified, giving police a key piece of evidence to track. As detectives reviewed the footage and interviewed witnesses, one name quickly rose to the top of their list: Andrew Beard. Andrew's motive was clear. His contentious custody battle with Alyssa, combined with the escalating harassment campaign against her, made him the prime suspect. Detectives began piecing together a timeline of his movements on the day of the murder, scrutinizing his phone records, digital footprint, and recent purchases. Receipts uncovered during the investigation revealed that Andrew had bought the disguise items and weapons used in the attack, further implicating him in the crime. As they delved deeper, investigators discovered the extent of Andrew's preparation. GPS data linked him to the scene of the crime, and his internet search history showed disturbing queries related to disguises, violent acts, and evading law enforcement. Detectives also uncovered communication between Andrew and his fiancée, Holly Elkins, which hinted at her potential involvement. Text messages revealed discussions about Alyssa, some of which suggested that Holly had encouraged Andrew's violent intentions. Forensic evidence played a critical role in the investigation. DNA from the disguise items discarded near the crime scene matched Andrew, and ballistics analysis confirmed that the gun used in the attack was one he had acquired in the weeks prior. Combined with eyewitness accounts and his known animosity toward Alyssa, the evidence against Andrew quickly became overwhelming. Holly's involvement also came under scrutiny as investigators uncovered her role in the harassment campaign. While her exact level of participation in the murder remained unclear at first, her connection to Andrew and her support of his actions raised red flags. Police worked to determine whether she had actively helped plan the crime or if her encouragement had emboldened Andrew to act. The investigation moved swiftly, with law enforcement building a strong case against Andrew and Holly. Within days, he was arrested and charged, marking the first step towards seeking justice for Alyssa. Andrew faced multiple charges, including capital murder. Prosecutors presented a case built on a mountain of evidence: surveillance footage, forensic analysis, and Andrew's digital trail. The prosecution argued that the murder was not a spontaneous act, but the culmination of months of planning. They described Andrew's obsession with gaining custody of his daughter and the escalating harassment campaign against Alyssa as evidence of his intent. The chilling preparation, the disguise, the weapons, and the surveillance painted a picture of a man driven by control and revenge. Key witnesses included law enforcement officers, forensic experts, and Alyssa's friends and family. The trial also delved into Holly Elkins' involvement. Text messages between the couple showed that Holly was fully aware of Andrew's actions and, at times, encouraged his attempts to harm Alyssa, either psychologically or physically. This evidence left many questioning whether her role should have led to harsher charges. Andrew's defense team attempted to argue for mitigating circumstances, claiming that his actions stemmed from emotional distress related to the custody battle. They also tried to downplay the extent of Holly's involvement, suggesting that her words and actions were not directly tied to the murder. However, these arguments were overshadowed by the overwhelming evidence against Andrew, which left little room for doubt. In the end, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Andrew was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The severity of the punishment reflected the premeditated and brutal nature of the crime, as well as the devastating impact on Alyssa's family and friends. For Holly Elkins, the legal consequences were less severe. She faced charges related to her role in the harassment campaign and received a lesser sentence, which many observers viewed as insufficient given the gravity of her involvement. Her release date became a point of contention, sparking debates about accountability and justice in cases involving accomplices to violent crimes. The conclusion of the trial brought a measure of closure for Alyssa's loved ones, though the pain of her loss remained immeasurable. While justice was served in the courtroom, the verdicts could never undo the devastating impact of Andrew and Holly's actions. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video. Peter Manfredonia was born and raised in Newtown, Connecticut, a town that had already been marked by tragedy due to the 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. Growing up in this quiet suburban community, he was known as a bright student with a promising future. He attended Newtown High School, where he was active in sports, particularly wrestling. Those who knew him described him as intelligent and generally well-liked, though some later recalled signs of mental distress. After high school, Manfredonia enrolled at the University of Connecticut, UConn, where he studied finance and mechanical engineering. His academic record suggested capability, but by his later college years, concerns about his mental health became more pronounced. Friends and acquaintances reported that he struggled with depression and anxiety. Some suggested he had sought professional help, though the extent of his treatment remains unclear. Manfredonia's online presence hinted at his inner turmoil. His social media activity included posts about mental health and cryptic messages that, in hindsight, seemed to foreshadow his later actions. At times, he spoke about feeling isolated and expressed frustration with the world. Despite these warning signs, nothing in Manfredonia's past suggested he would become the subject of a multi-state manhunt. He had no criminal record before May 2020. However, those who interacted with him noted that he could be unpredictable, sometimes shifting between friendly and distant. As the COVID-19 pandemic intensified in early 2020, Manfredonia's struggles appeared to worsen. The lockdowns and isolation may have exacerbated his existing mental health challenges. Some friends noticed he was withdrawing more, speaking less frequently, and appearing increasingly agitated. However, no one could have anticipated what would happen next. On May 22, 2020, a seemingly ordinary day in Willington, Connecticut, marked the beginning of a shocking crime spree. What started as a chance encounter with a stranger would soon spiral into violence, triggering a 5-day manhunt across multiple states. On the morning of May 22, 2020, the small town of Willington, Connecticut, was quiet, its wooded roads and rural atmosphere offering the kind of peacefulness that rarely made headlines. That calm shattered when Peter Manfredonia, now armed and dangerous, embarked on a path of violence that would claim multiple lives. It began when Ted Demers, a 62-year-old resident, was working outside his home. A kind and well-respected member of the community, Demers was known for his generosity and willingness to lend a hand. That afternoon, he and a neighbor noticed a young man walking along the road, looking disoriented. The man was Peter Manfredonia. Manfredonia told Demers that his motorcycle had broken down nearby and that he needed a ride. Without hesitation, Demers offered to help. He and his neighbor, John Franco, another Willington resident, approached Manfredonia with the intention of assisting him. However, the moment they came closer, Manfredonia attacked. Armed with a machete-like sword, Manfredonia struck Demers multiple times, inflicting fatal wounds. Franco, though injured, managed to escape and call for help. By the time first responders arrived, Demers was bleeding heavily and in critical condition. He was rushed to the hospital, but his injuries were too severe. He died shortly after. Franco, though wounded, survived and later provided details to the authorities. His testimony confirmed that the attack was unprovoked and brutal, leaving the community in shock. Willington, a town largely untouched by violent crime, was suddenly at the center of a murder investigation. After killing Demers, Manfredonia fled into the woods, disappearing before police could apprehend him. Authorities immediately launched a search, warning residents to lock their doors and stay inside. Helicopters, K-9 units, and officers scoured the area, but Manfredonia had already slipped away. Over the next several hours, police pieced together what had happened. Manfredonia had not been randomly wandering. He had targeted the area deliberately. Investigators later learned that he had a connection to someone in Wellington, though it was unclear if that connection played a role in the attack. As night fell, Manfredonia broke into a home nearby, escalating his crime spree even further. Inside the house, a terrified homeowner found himself taken hostage, forced to confront the reality that the young man now holding him at gunpoint had already killed once. This was no longer an isolated murder. It was the start of something far more dangerous. As night fell on May 22, 2020, Peter Manfredonia had already killed one man and injured another in Wellington. Now, with police searching for him in the woods, he needed shelter, weapons, and transportation. He found them at the home of an unsuspecting 73-year-old man living just a few miles from the scene of the attack. Manfredonia forced his way into the home, taking the elderly homeowner hostage. Armed and dangerous, he tied the man up and held him captive for nearly 24 hours. During this time, he ransacked the house, gathering supplies. He stole 2 firearms, food, and the keys to the man's pickup truck, all while keeping his hostage under constant threat. Investigators later revealed that Manfredonia spoke to the hostage about his state of mind, hinting at his struggles with mental health and alluding to reasons behind his crimes. He mentioned that he just snapped and that he was now on the run with no clear plan. Despite these remarks, he showed no hesitation in using violence, reinforcing the level of danger he posed. At some point during the home invasion, Manfredonia managed to access the homeowner's financial accounts and transferred several $1,000s to himself. This money would later aid in his escape, allowing him to travel undetected across state lines. Throughout the ordeal, the hostage remained restrained but unharmed. Manfredonia did not kill him, a decision that would later provide investigators with crucial information about his mindset and movements. When Manfredonia finally left the next day, he took the homeowner's 2006 black Ford F-150 pickup truck, 2 guns, and other supplies. The hostage was left behind, shaken but alive. By the morning of May 23, 2020, Manfredonia was gone. Authorities arrived at the home shortly after and learned of the frightening encounter. With his access to weapons and a vehicle, the situation had become even more urgent. Police immediately issued a BOLO, be on the lookout alert, for the stolen truck, broadcasting Manfredonia's description to law enforcement agencies across multiple states. Warnings were sent to residents, urging them not to approach him if spotted, as he was now considered armed and extremely dangerous. For a brief moment, it seemed like Manfredonia had vanished. But just a few hours later, the stolen Ford F-150 was found abandoned near Osborndale State Park in Darby, Connecticut, over 60 miles from Wellington. This discovery suggested that Manfredonia had either switched vehicles or found another way to travel. Authorities scrambled to track his next move. Surveillance footage from the area later confirmed their worst fears. Manfredonia had made his way to a home in Derby, where someone he knew lived. Less than 24 hours after escaping Wellington, he was about to strike again. By the afternoon of May 24, 2020, Peter Manfredonia had already committed a brutal murder, taken a man hostage, stolen weapons, and abandoned a stolen truck in Derby, Connecticut. But he wasn't done. His next target was someone he knew, Nicholas Eisel, a 23-year-old acquaintance from Newtown. Isley lived in a small apartment complex in Derby with his girlfriend, Shannon Spies. Unlike the random attack in Wellington, this was a targeted killing. It's unclear what drove Manfredonia to Isley's home, but some reports suggest the two may have had past conflicts. Manfredonia arrived at the apartment sometime in the early afternoon. He forced his way inside, catching Isley and Spies off guard. A confrontation quickly turned violent. At gunpoint, Manfredonia shot Isley in the head, killing him instantly. Shannon Spies was now alone in the apartment with a known killer, facing a terrifying uncertainty. Would she be next? Instead of killing her, Manfredonia made a different decision. He took Spies hostage, forcing her into Isole's 2016 Volkswagen Jetta. With his hostage in the passenger seat, he fled the scene, now with law enforcement closing in on him. Neighbors later reported hearing a commotion before seeing the Jetta speed away. It wasn't long before Isel's body was discovered, triggering a statewide alert. Spies was now missing, and authorities feared that Manfredonia might kill her next. Connecticut State Police, the FBI, and the U.S. Marshals Service immediately launched an urgent search. The public was warned to be on the lookout for the stolen Jetta, with descriptions of both Manfredonia and spies broadcast widely. Manfredonia, however, was already on the move. For hours, Manfredonia drove south with his captive. Sometime that evening, they crossed state lines into New Jersey. At a rest stop in Columbia, New Jersey, he made his next move. He let spies go. He didn't kill her. He didn't harm her further. Instead, he abandoned her at the rest stop, allowing her to run for help. Spies immediately called 911, reporting that she had been kidnapped but was now safe. This marked a turning point. For the first time, authorities had a real-time update on Manfredonia's whereabouts. But by the time law enforcement arrived at the rest stop, he was gone. The stolen Volkswagen Jetta was found abandoned nearby. Surveillance footage showed that Manfredonia had left on foot, disappearing into the night. He had now officially escaped into New Jersey, with law enforcement scrambling to predict his next move. By now, the case had gained nationwide attention. With 2 murders, a home invasion, and a kidnapping under his belt, Manfredonia was one of the most wanted fugitives in America. But despite the growing law enforcement presence, he still had one thing on his side: time. For the next 3 days, he remained on the run, evading capture as the manhunt stretched across multiple states. After ditching Nicholas Isley's stolen Volkswagen Jetta, Manfredonia needed a new way to keep moving. Surveillance footage later confirmed that he walked along train tracks and highways, carefully avoiding detection. The next confirmed sighting came in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, a small town near the New Jersey border. Investigators learned that Manfredonia arrived at a Walmart, where he purchased camping gear, a duffel bag, food, and a prepaid phone. He was clearly preparing for a prolonged escape. Detectives reviewing security footage saw that Manfredonia had changed clothes, blending in with other shoppers. By now, his face was being broadcast nationwide, but he still managed to evade capture. After leaving the Walmart, he disappeared again. Police suspected he was hitchhiking or using public transportation, but no one knew for sure. Over the next 48 hours, authorities received multiple tips from Pennsylvania residents who believed they had spotted Manfredonia. Reports placed him in wooded areas, small towns, and truck stops. One of the most credible sightings came from a rideshare driver who claimed he had picked up a man matching Manfredonia's description and dropped him off near Allentown, Pennsylvania. If the report was accurate, Manfredonia was moving south, closer to major highways that could take him even farther away. As the manhunt intensified, the FBI, U.S. Marshals, and Connecticut State Police increased their search efforts. A $10,000 reward was offered for information leading to his capture, but Manfredonia was still ahead of them. By May 27, 2020, 3 days after leaving New Jersey, the fugitive resurfaced in Hagerstown, Maryland, over 250 miles from where he had last been seen. Authorities confirmed his presence after security cameras captured him at a gas station, wearing black shorts, a t-shirt, and a backpack. It was clear that he had continued traveling on foot or by hitchhiking. Shortly after this sighting, authorities cornered him near a truck stop. He was taken into custody without incident, ending the massive 5-day multi-state manhunt. In his possession were a stolen firearm, cash, and camping supplies, evidence that he had been prepared to stay on the run much longer. With his capture, the focus of the case shifted. Now, the question was not where he was, but what justice would look like for his crimes. After 5 days on the run, Peter Manfredonia's capture in Hagerstown, Maryland, on May 27, 2020, ended one of the most intense multi-state manhunts in recent history. With his arrest, law enforcement shifted their focus from pursuit to prosecution. Manfredonia was extradited to Connecticut, where he faced multiple felony charges, including murder for the killings of Ted Demers and Nicholas Isley, attempted murder for the attack on John Franco, home invasion and kidnapping, weapons violations, and larceny. His first court appearance was in June 2020. Due to the severity of the crimes, the judge set his bond at $7 million, ensuring he remained in custody. Prosecutors described him as extremely dangerous, emphasizing the brutality of his attacks. Manfredonia's defense team did not dispute that he had committed the crimes, but argued that his mental health struggles played a role. Reports surfaced that he had been dealing with depression, anxiety, and paranoia, though no official diagnosis of a severe mental illness was confirmed in court. Over the next 2 years, legal proceedings were delayed multiple times, partly due to pandemic-related court backlogs. During this period, prosecutors gathered evidence, including surveillance footage, forensic reports, and witness testimonies. In February 2023, Manfredonia finally pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including murder for both Demers and Isley, assault with a deadly weapon, home invasion, and kidnapping. By pleading guilty, he avoided trial but faced a lengthy prison sentence. On April 19, 2023, Manfredonia was sentenced to 55 years in prison. During the hearing, family members of the victims spoke about their grief and anger. Cynthia Demers, the widow of Ted Demers, called Manfredonia's actions pure evil, describing the devastating impact of her husband's murder. Isley's family also gave emotional statements, demanding that Manfredonia spend the rest of his life behind bars. Manfredonia declined to speak in court, offering no apology or explanation. His defense attorney reiterated that he had been struggling with mental health issues, but the judge made it clear that his crimes were premeditated and violent. With his sentencing complete, Manfredonia was transferred to a high-security Connecticut prison, where he will serve the remainder of his sentence without the possibility of parole. Though his capture ended the physical danger, the emotional scars left by his crimes remain. Families of the victims continue to mourn, and the communities affected still struggle to make sense of why it all happened.
There are thousands of stories about people's disappearances. Most of them end tragically. After some time, people are found, but sadly, it's no longer possible to help them. This is a story about the disappearance of one woman who vanished without a trace in a train car. She desperately needed assistance, but there was no one around. I'm certain this disappearance story will move you to your core, as it's unlike any other you've heard before. The married couple was peacefully falling asleep to the rhythm of the train wheels. Their 11-hour journey home was supposed to end by morning. The husband and wife lay on adjacent upper berths and could observe everyone moving through the aisle. Gradually, the commotion subsided, and the car's passengers grew quiet, falling into sleep accompanied by the hypnotic clatter of wheels. After some time, Gia, the wife, carefully dangled her legs to climb down and visit the restroom. Her husband Lee felt movement nearby, slowly opened his eyes, and looked at his phone, which showed 1 o'clock in the morning. He wanted to accompany his spouse, but Gia gestured for him to stop, then pointed to the elderly people sleeping on the lower berths beneath them. She didn't want to accidentally wake other passengers, so she whispered to Lee that there was no need to worry. She took her handbag and hurried toward the bathroom. Meanwhile, Lee was already awake and simply watched, as signal lights occasionally flickered in the pitch darkness outside the train window. The rhythmic sound of wheels gradually shut down his consciousness. Suddenly, the man jumped up, awakened by some kind of crash. The train was just navigating a sharp turn. When Lee's eyes finally opened, he again looked at the clock, showing 1:30 in the morning. Then he glanced at the adjacent upper berth and realized that Gia still hadn't returned. Different thoughts began racing through Lee's mind. To calm himself, the man carefully climbed down from the berth, quickly slipped on his shoes, and headed toward the restroom. Perhaps something unpleasant had happened to his wife and she needed his help. However, the bathroom in their 13th car was empty. Although this didn't necessarily mean anything, Gia could have gone to the adjacent car. The bathroom door in the 14th car was unlocked. But there was no one inside, just as there wasn't in the 15th and 16th cars. Before feeling intense panic and unpleasant sensations in his chest, Lee rushed to the conductor's compartment and began knocking on the door. The door opened and a confused train employee appeared in the doorway. Apparently, he had also dozed off while all the passengers in the car were sleeping. But the conductor calmed Lee's indignant exclamation about his wife's disappearance, assuring the man that nobody disappears on a moving train. All railway workers know that if you pull the emergency brake, the train won't stop instantly. Due to momentum, it will continue moving for some time. It's practically the same as ordering a herd of elephants to immediately halt their run at full speed. Sometimes a catastrophe happens right before the train operator's eyes, and there's absolutely nothing they can do about it. This was the only thought that crossed the mind of another train's operator when he spotted some strange object in the middle of the tracks. He abruptly hit the emergency brake, and the train traveled about another mile before coming to a stop. The operator assumed that some animal had wandered onto the tracks, because there was clearly some slight movement there. He jumped out of the train cabin and ran toward this object along with other staff members. Meanwhile, the conductor of the train carrying G and Lee only now understood what the passenger wanted. He reassured the man again that his wife hadn't disappeared anywhere. Most likely, she just couldn't sleep and had gone to the dining car located in the center of the train. This was the most logical place to search. So now, two people set out to find the missing woman. The dining car smelled of food, as expected, despite the late hour of around 2 in the morning. At one of the tables, someone was leaning their head against the window reading a newspaper. Someone else was already drinking hot coffee. Lee and the conductor examined the hall, looked under each table, but Gia was nowhere to be found. In total, this train had 18 cars, 8 with seats and 8 with 3-tiered sleeping berths, a dining car, and a cargo car. This was a large train, capable of holding up to 1,500 people. To search the entire train for the missing woman would take considerable time. Lee and the conductor began checking each car. Chinese seated cars can be divided into 3 different levels. The first is a space where you can travel standing or sitting on your own luggage. There aren't many seats there, so you can only get a hard seat if you're lucky. A ticket for such a car costs less than $1. Usually, there are many people who cannot afford sleeping berths. Searching for someone in a space where people are packed like sardines in a can is very difficult. Lee tried calling his wife's name, but to no avail. After somehow making their way through drowsy passengers, he and the conductor reached the cars with hard seats. These cars were more comfortable to travel in since you could at least sit down. However, the seats were very hard and positioned very close to each other. The men went through the hard seat cars row by row. Most people were dozing, sitting with their heads leaning against fellow passengers. The conductor illuminated faces with his flashlight, but the missing Gia wasn't among them. Passengers squinted and covered their faces from the light with their hands. Then Lee and the conductor moved to the cars with soft seats. There weren't as many passengers there since the number of seats was significantly less than in the hard seat cars. And the further these two progressed through the moving train, the more confused they felt. The woman couldn't have simply vanished without leaving any trace. The conductor began to have unsettling thoughts. Could the husband have simply disposed of his wife under cover of night, then pretended she had disappeared? Lee said he saw Gia heading to the restroom. It was strange that he immediately fell asleep for half an hour after that. In essence, a moving train is the perfect place to commit a crime. One could take someone's life while everyone around is sleeping. Then wait until the train passes along the edge of some cliff and, opening the door, dispose of the body. After which, pretend that your spouse vanished, and any of the 1,000 passengers and train staff could become suspects. By the time anyone realizes your wife is truly missing, the train would be very far from her body. Lee, while he and the conductor went through car after car, continuously dialed his wife's number, hoping to hear her mobile phone ring. Gia could hear her husband dialing her number over and over. She knew from the ringtone that it was Lee calling because his number had a distinct melody assigned to it. Unfortunately, at this moment, the woman couldn't answer him and tell him where she was. And this also made her heart break into pieces. The train conductor watched as Lee futilely tried to reach his wife, and an unexpected thought occurred to him. What if the woman was never on this train? Could anyone confirm that Lee hadn't boarded the train alone? Her outer clothes and handbag were gone because she took everything with her, or perhaps because they never existed at all. This seemed like a logical explanation for how a woman could vanish on a moving train with more than 1,000 people. What were the chances that one of the passengers hadn't lost his mind? Maybe Lee sincerely believed his wife was traveling with him, but in reality, she never boarded this train? There's a film called Flight Plan that was released several years before this incident. The story centers on a woman named Kyle, who worked as an airline engineer and boarded a flight from Berlin to the USA with her 6-year-old daughter Julia. This was a very difficult journey for them both. They had flown to Berlin to bring back the body of Kyle's deceased husband home to the United States. And now the coffin with his body was in the plane's cargo hold. The grief-stricken woman, having just lost her husband, her child's father, decided after takeoff to take some sedatives to try to endure all this horror. When she woke up, her daughter Julia wasn't beside her. Kyle began to worry. She alerted the flight crew that her daughter had disappeared. The girl's belongings and boarding pass were gone. This situation was very similar to how Lee warned the train conductor, and they rushed to search for the missing person. The only difference was that discreetly disposing of a body from a plane several thousand feet above ground isn't so simple. At first, the flight attendants and crew helped the woman inspect all possible areas, thinking the girl might have accidentally wandered somewhere and couldn't get out. But after some time, the search abruptly stopped. The flight attendant told Kyle that her child wasn't on the passenger list, and worse still, they had contacted the authorities in Berlin and learned that little Julia had died along with her father. The plane's crew supposed that Kyle was in a state of shock and grief over the loss of her loved ones. Her brain wasn't able to process information adequately, and she might have been experiencing hallucinations. The woman almost believed them until she saw a tiny heart that her daughter had drawn before takeoff on the fogged-up window. So Julia definitely had been sitting next to her until Kyle passed out from the medication she took. And a legitimate question arose: where could a girl disappear to from a flying plane? At the end of the film, Kyle managed to prove that her daughter was quite real and had indeed taken her seat in the cabin next to her at boarding. There was a very specific reason why the child wasn't now next to her mother. A similar theory that Lee had just gone crazy and believed he had boarded the train with his wife fell apart because Gia had a train ticket. Fellow passengers had seen her boarding the car with her husband and had even spoken with her. The train conductor and Lee began combing through the sleeping cars again. Technically, that's where Gia was last seen. The car consisted of several sections, each with 6 sleeping berths. The berths were arranged in 3 tiers. The electric light was dimmed at night, so the search had to be conducted by flashlight. Lee and Gia were traveling on the 2nd tier. It's not as comfortable as the first, but better than the 3rd. You can look out the window and see everyone who moved through the aisle. What if someone had seen Gia heading to the bathroom alone, followed the woman, kidnapped or harmed her? Then where could they have hidden her if Lee and the conductor had already checked all the cars? Meanwhile, Gia was lying in complete darkness and bone-chilling cold. She couldn't move, though she tried. It felt as if she was tied to a bed of steel nails. She should never have gone to the bathroom in another car. Then everything would have turned out differently. The woman pondered over the possible sequence of events because she had no ability to do anything now. She lay there feeling blood trickling down the lower part of her body. The woman screamed, but at that moment, no one could hear her. Lee approached the bathroom, the one his wife had headed to. The doors were locked. The man began pounding his fist on the panels and calling for his spouse. Perhaps she had fallen ill and lost consciousness. It was possible that Gia was lying there on the cold floor waiting for help while he and the conductor were running through the cars. Maybe they had somehow missed each other. Despite other passengers sleeping peacefully, the man began shaking the door handle, trying to use all his strength to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The conductor saw Lee's attempts, knocked on the door himself, and warned that he was going to unlock it from outside with his key. Before he could do this, there was a click. The bathroom door opened and out came a middle-aged man zipping up his pants. He smirked strangely, and Lee immediately suspected that this man had clearly done something to his wife. He rushed into the empty cubicle, but there were no traces of his spouse there. There were more than 1,000 random people on the train. The passengers were isolated from the outside world. Could any of them have harbored sinister intentions? Even if we assume that there was a perpetrator on the train who harmed Gia, where could he have hidden the woman or her body if even the conductor couldn't find her? Could she have been the intended target of an attack, or was she just a random victim? Gia was a 44-year-old mother of a son and happy wife. She worked as a manager at a toothpaste manufacturing company. Their family couldn't be called wealthy. She and her husband worked hard to provide for themselves and their child, and now they were returning from a small trip. Gia didn't possess any incredible beauty that might have earned her rivals, was known for her calm nature, and generally had no enemies. She and her husband were ordinary people, a middle-class family. Perhaps Gia had wanted to disappear for some reason herself, like 49-year-old Louis Le Prince, the French inventor who created the first chronophotographic camera for recording moving images, the prototype of history's first motion picture camera. Le Prince planned to promote his developments in Europe and America simultaneously, but his plans were never to be realized due to his mysterious disappearance in 1890. Le Prince had set out to visit his friends and relatives. He boarded a train from Dijon, France to Paris. After that, no one saw him because he vanished without a trace from the train. His luggage and clothes disappeared with him. None of the passengers remembered this man. So the mystery of Louis Le Prince's disappearance remains unsolved to this day. There was evidence that the inventor had indeed boarded the train, but he never arrived in Paris. The police search that began shortly after yielded no results. There were several main theories about the mysterious disappearance, but none were documented conclusively. One theory suggested that the man who created the first movie camera was so clever that he managed to stage his own disappearance. Maybe he waited until the train slowed down or took advantage of an unscheduled stop and slipped away from the car to start a new life somewhere else. Perhaps someone wanted Le Prince's inventions and wanted to take over the patent for his technology development, so they simply removed their competitor from the path and then disposed of the body. Only in 2003 did police archives reveal a photograph of a drowned man, dated 1890, whose appearance resembled Louis Le Prince. All of this resembled a magic trick when a person vanished without a trace on a moving train. But the inventor lived in the last century, when there were no mobile phones and other gadgets that could be tracked. In our time, disappearing without a trace is practically impossible. In any case, there must be some trace left behind. Lee felt he was starting to lose his mind in this moving train. He ran through the car aisles and called out his wife's name. He no longer cared if he disturbed other passengers. He just needed to find his spouse. The man peered into strangers' faces, assessed large luggage, imagining if an adult woman could be hidden inside, and all this time continued dialing his wife's number. When the call was redirected to voicemail after several rings, Lee disconnected and immediately dialed again and again and again. When a male voice suddenly came through the receiver, Lee froze, pulled the phone away from his ear, and checked if he had dialed the correct number. The stranger on the other end informed that Lee's wife was in the hospital and he needed to come to the specified address. After some time, Lee sat on the hospital floor, his back against the ward door. He clenched his teeth with all his might, trying to hold back a sob. The screams coming from the hospital room were simply inhuman. They resembled the cries of a wounded beast. The man had never heard anyone scream like that in his life. And all these sounds were coming from his wife, Gia. He heard them through the door. The woman screamed that her left leg was terribly painful. She begged for different pain medication because this one wasn't helping. The pain that Gia endured was so overwhelming that she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't distract herself from it for days and nights. All she did was scream until she was exhausted. Her throat never stopped making sounds from the strain. Lee knew he needed to go in there and try to comfort his wife. He took a deep breath, wiped away tears with the back of his hand, straightened up, and with a smile opened the door to the ward. Every day, several times, the man came to the hospital, sat on the edge of the hospital bed and held his hand near his wife. He didn't touch her because any contact caused the woman unimaginable torment. His task was to somehow distract and comfort his spouse. Once again, he explained to her that the severe pain in her left leg was just in her head. The pain wasn't real, since something that doesn't exist cannot hurt. Gia looked down and saw that her left leg, left arm, and right foot were severed. She had lost 3 limbs, but could still feel them. This is called phantom limb pain. Such pains can be throbbing, stabbing, crushing as if in a vice, shooting like electric shocks. Brain function becomes disrupted and the nervous system sends signals to receptors. Phantom pain is no less acute than physical pain. People actually feel their missing limbs aching and hurting. The body doesn't understand what's happening and sends a signal to the brain that something is wrong. Phantom pains can last for a very long time and torment a person. Getting rid of phantom limb pain syndrome is quite difficult. Sometimes they haunt a person until death. Gia said that the first attack of phantom limb pain made her scream so loudly that she stopped hearing her own voice. Lee didn't want to ask his wife about what happened, knowing that any memory plunged her into severe stress. Therefore, he tried to get some fragments of information from the investigators who were first to arrive at the scene and found Gia. This tragic situation simply stunned them. When the police arrived at the train operator's call, they didn't even immediately understand what was before them. They stood and stared at the red earth, blood and body parts scattered along the railway tracks. The officers couldn't tell if the person before them was male or female. It was even difficult to say if this was a human, a large animal, or a pile of human remains dumped on the tracks. After some time, the railway company investigators huddled in a circle to look at the black hole into which Gia had fallen. In the middle of car 14, there was actually a space that opened from the inside. The woman was returning to her seat in car 13 after visiting the restroom. The toilet in their car was occupied, so she decided to go to the adjacent one. At some point, the rails sharply veered left and the person standing inside the train was carried sideways by inertia. Gia took a step to the side to avoid falling onto a sleeping passenger's berth, when the tiles under her feet literally disappeared, swinging open like a door to the underworld. In the blink of an eye, the woman was sucked into the black hole. Gia fell onto the railway tracks. In a second, her head was filled with metallic thunder, which was immediately replaced by unbearable pain throughout her body. She felt terror engulf her, felt how each car wheel passed through her body. At least that's how she imagined it. Gia screamed so loudly that she seemed to drown out the clatter of wheels and screeching metal, and then her awareness of what was happening left her. The woman was run over by several cars moving at a speed of 37 miles per hour. By the time the train carrying Gia had moved further down the investigation path, she looked as if she had been chewed up and then spat out. When fragments of consciousness began returning, and the woman realized she had somehow remained alive, she just lay there staring at the night sky. There wasn't a single star, the space around seemed pitch black, and then the pain came. If any train passengers had seen how the woman disappeared into a black hole in a second, they would surely have thought it was some kind of magic or sorcery. Or taken it all for a nightmare, her fall was so unreal. Moving objects possess greater force than objects at rest. If you hit your head on a stationary basketball, it might be painful and unpleasant, but it won't take your life. But if someone drops that ball on your head from the top floor of a high-rise building, such a drop could end in hospitalization or even death. The railway train carrying Lee and Gia weighed approximately more than 1,000 tons, equivalent to the weight of 200 giant elephants. It's impossible to imagine the consequences of such trauma. For some time, Gia couldn't comprehend what had happened to her, and when she did, she felt the full horror of the situation. If she didn't move from her spot soon, another train would come and completely tear the rest of her body to pieces, leaving behind puzzle fragments that the coroner would have to piece together. And that's assuming she would be found before some animals got to her first. Gia lay on the rails, and the goal, at least theoretically, was quite simple: to move her body to the side. She didn't even think about anything more, understanding that if she wanted to survive, she needed to move from that spot. As soon as the woman made her first attempt to move, a very strange sensation arose in her body. Gia tried to move her left arm, but the arm seemed like it didn't belong to her at all. It wouldn't obey, no matter how much Gia strained her muscles. The victim could practically feel the veins in her head swelling and pulsing, but nothing else happened. All she could do was lie on the cold railway tracks that dug into her back and smell the terrible metallic odor. She thought this metallic smell was coming from the rusty railway tracks. In reality, Gia very soon realized that it was the smell of her blood. She used all her strength to lift her head slightly and look down at the condition of her body. The feelings that overwhelmed the woman at that very minute cannot be put into words. Her left arm was almost completely torn from her body. Her left leg was missing up to the thigh. Her right foot was gone. Only one limb remained, her right arm, but even it was covered in sticky red liquid and refused to obey. The first thought that visited Gia at the moment when she saw her body was to just leave everything as it was. She wouldn't be able to do anything anyway. She would never gather enough strength. She had no chance of survival. The first passing train would smear her remains across the rails, and that would be it. Gia wished to slip into nothingness, to not know when her soul would finally leave her body. However, instead of a merciful blackout, images of her husband and son began racing through her head. A logical thought came to mind. Her son couldn't live without his mother. Her husband wouldn't survive her death. Her aging mother and only sister would go mad with grief. So Gia realized she couldn't give up and die. She lay there repeating in her mind over and over, "Son, Mom is going to come home to you." Despite the horrible consequences of falling from the train, Gia was determined to drag her body off the railway tracks at any cost. She used her only working arm, which was also almost destroyed, to grab the rails and try to turn her body to the side. Ignoring the excruciating pain rising up her arm, Gia gathered together bits of energy, adrenaline, love for her son and husband, and pulled with all her might. She managed to move a couple of millimeters before immediately passing out. Regaining consciousness once again, the woman again suppressed the pain in her body through sheer will and moved another millimeter. Losing massive amounts of blood, remnants of energy, she kept regaining consciousness again and again and tried to drag the crushed remains of her body to safety. A familiar melody, first constantly playing on Gia's mobile phone lying somewhere nearby, and then repeating in her head, prevented her from blacking out completely. "I love you 10,000 years. I love you enough to endure trials." That was exactly how the ringtone set for her husband Lee's call sounded. Gia knew her spouse was already looking for her and would find her sooner or later. The woman couldn't reach her phone, it was too far away for her. She used this song as motivation to make new attempts to move from her spot. If Gia could reach her purse and answer the call, Lee would surely have rushed to help already. But for her in this situation, these were just unrealistic dreams. For the next 30 minutes, with breaks for rest, Gia managed to drag herself off the rails. Her strength ran out when her head touched the cold metal. She knew that there would either be one more attempt, or she would simply die. There was no other way out. However, her body began to give up. The adrenaline level dropped. All the woman wanted now was to fall asleep right there, face down on the cold rails. And that meant certain death. Everything hurt. While Gia slowly moved along the railway tracks, she had worn her lips and gums raw, couldn't feel her arms and legs. Her entire body was stained with a mixture of blood and sweat. Imminent death no longer frightened her. There was no strength left to fight on. Gia knew that the wheels of the next train would cut off her head. Being completely exhausted, she was already ready to let this happen. But after resting for several more minutes, she gathered her strength and moved her head away from the rails by just a couple of millimeters. Gia decided that at least this way her face would remain intact, and then she fell into an abyss of unconsciousness. It's unknown how much time had passed when the woman felt a vibration. Her entire body began to tremble. Then somewhere in the distance, a loud roaring sound was heard. Gia opened her eyes and saw a train coming straight at her. This was her only hope for rescue. Gia wanted the train operator to notice her. She nervously counted the seconds until the headlight beams fell directly on her. Then she did the unthinkable. She raised her head so high that the train operator managed to notice some movement on the tracks and made an emergency stop. By that point, Gia had again lost consciousness from unimaginable pain. The train crew immediately rushed back to the woman lying on the tracks after the train came to a complete stop. They called the transport police because they couldn't understand how this could have happened. The officers who arrived at the scene initially didn't understand how to help the victim. They didn't even have a stretcher to load the mutilated body into the car. One of the officers removed a door from its hinges at the police station to carefully place the woman and her severed limbs on it. This is how Gia ended up in the hospital. They didn't know if she would survive, looking at the tormented body on the doorframe and clearly realizing that the odds were not in her favor. If a healthy person lies in bed for several days in a row, they start experiencing back pain, their legs and arms become numb, and it becomes difficult to get up. NASA conducted studies to show future astronauts what changes occur in the body during prolonged exposure to microgravity conditions. This involves muscle atrophy and loss of bone density. Test subjects were asked to spend most of their time lying down for 3 consecutive months. After 90 days, many previously healthy people experienced severe back pain, weakness in their limbs, profuse sweating, and complete lack of physical strength. Gia had to lie in a hospital bed for 190 days. All this time she was actively fighting death. Her right arm was immobilized in thick plaster. The rest of her body was bandaged like a mummy. Half of it was simply missing. Gia couldn't move. She spent all her time in the same position for more than 2 months. The woman had a special inflatable anti-bed sore mattress with a compressor, where air is alternately supplied to different parts of it. So it creates a sensation of being on water. The body experiences mild wave-like stimulation to reduce pressure on skin and muscles. But each wave, each compression of air, made Gia scream in agony. She felt as if the catastrophe was happening over and over again. It was painful. However, this was nothing compared to the recovery period. When nurses came to change bandages, they couldn't even look the woman in the eyes. Her frenzied scream sent chills down their spines. Her medical chart was so extensive that it could no longer contain the list of all injuries. Gia's left arm was completely missing. The left leg was torn from the pelvic bone. They wanted to amputate the right arm too because the shoulder was shattered in many places. The right leg was amputated below the knee. In one part of her head, the skin was scraped down to the skull. The woman had lost a frightening amount of blood, almost half of her body's total volume. Her heart was beating at 29 beats per minute. Severe damage to internal organs, head trauma, terrible abrasions all over the body, and minor injuries numbered in the thousands. Every day, doctors had to examine the patient's skin and cut away the dead flesh. Gia felt she had already lost an enormous part of herself, but each day they kept taking more and more from her. At some point, she required a skin transplant. The only nearly healthy skin remaining was on her right thigh, and doctors had to take it from there. So there wasn't a single unaffected spot left on the woman's body. The loss of half her body was nothing compared to the psychological losses. Not only her body, but her soul was torn into pieces. Gia feared one day looking in the mirror and seeing a monster. However, Gia is not a monster. She is a person who miraculously survived a catastrophe due to the negligence of the railway company that was responsible for the train where this entire incident occurred. At first, no one even believed that the woman had fallen through a hole in the train car floor. They assumed she hadn't followed safety protocols and must have fallen in the passage between 2 cars or leaned against the door, lost her balance, and fallen out through an open door when the train turned. When investigators first arrived at the scene, Gia had already lost vast amounts of blood and was on the brink of death. But she managed to tell them that she had fallen through a hole right in the center aisle of car 14. Eventually, Gia filed a lawsuit against the railway company, and they tried to dismiss it, claiming that before departure, all cars underwent thorough inspection by conductors and train crew. So it wasn't their fault that the woman somehow ended up on the railway tracks. However, the opening in the car floor did indeed exist. Technically, it was a hatch mechanism designed for servicing the air conditioning system. If you didn't step on this particular spot in the car, nothing would have happened. The railway company had acquired an old train and renovated it. They preserved most of the exterior design, replacing only the equipment inside. The entire train consisted of old reconstructed cars of different colors. To make them more modern and comfortable, the company had to install air conditioners in the cars. And to service and fix them, a hatch was made in the floor, secured with bolts. At first glance, everything seemed reliable, but obviously over time the fastening system had become loose. When the train turned, Gia stepped on the dangerous section and instantly fell through, and then the hatch involuntarily slammed shut, like an abyss that had swallowed its victim. As a result of the railway company's negligence, Gia was deprived of a normal existence. The woman suffered psychological, emotional, and physical trauma, lost her ability to support herself, and became disabled. She needed compensation for medical expenses, caregiver costs, prosthetics expenses, modifications to make her housing wheelchair accessible, rehabilitation care, transportation costs, and compensation for emotional distress. Gia filed a lawsuit seeking compensation of $1.5 million. And this was trivial compared to what she had already endured and would face in the future. However, the transport company considered the lawsuit amount unreasonable and inflated. Even when the woman came to the courtroom in a wheelchair and showed what remained of her, people turned their heads away, unwilling to look at her severed limbs. As a result, the court rejected Gia's request for compensation of $1.5 million. Initially, they awarded her only $110,000, then decided this was insufficient and increased the amount to $190,000. And to add insult to injury, the railway company's motto was, "The greatest enemy of accidents is a sense of responsibility." Yet they themselves categorically refused to take responsibility for what had happened. $190,000 for everything that a healthy woman experienced after entrusting her life to the transport company. Gia's physical and psychological damage was absolutely disproportionate to the compensation she received. Her life changed in an instant. Her husband, Lee, also couldn't come to terms with the tragedy that suddenly struck their family. Lee couldn't comprehend how just hours ago his wife had been healthy. And now, she cannot brush her hair independently, dress herself, support her own body weight, or use the bathroom when she needs to. This woman's entire life drastically changed. She could no longer take care of herself. Now she has to ask for help with everything: getting up, lying down, washing her face, brushing her teeth, taking a bath, eating. If something was lying just a bit further from where Gia sat, she couldn't reach it anymore. After falling through the train hatch, Gia spent entire days indoors for more than 9 consecutive months. She didn't see sunlight, spending all her time in an enclosed space, confined by 4 walls. The woman felt imprisoned in a cage. After 190 days in the hospital, Gia was discharged, but she needed extensive rehabilitation to adapt to her new life. She went to a prosthetic center in Shanghai, but they didn't even know how to help her. The center's specialists had never before encountered such severe injuries. Gia said that she left home on her own feet and must enter it independently. She is indeed a strong woman who has overcome incredible pain. However, the story won't have a happy ending. Gia will never be able to stand up and walk through her home's front door. She tries with all her might to overcome the trials fate has sent her, but it isn't easy. Gia said she feels a mixture of happiness and sadness. She's grateful she can see her son again, but she's sorrowful because while her home remains the same, she is now different. She needs a large amount of sleeping medication to fall asleep at night. The likelihood that she will develop traumatic arthritis and have her remaining arm amputated is very high. Doctors had to piece her right shoulder together like a puzzle, and it's unknown how long it will continue to function. One can only hope that someday this woman's life will change for the better and a ray of hope will appear. But for now, her horizon is covered in dark clouds. If you made it to the end, you're a real true crime fan. Like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos.